What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. The former head of Donetsk People's Republic, Pavel Gubarev, was already known for making some very controversial anti-Putin and anti-invasion statements. Whether these were intentional speeches or accidental slips, the fact is the fact. Even those most trusted by Putin, those who were entrusted the power over occupied territories, are now speaking against this meaningless brutality. The most recent case of such thing happening was when Pavel Gubarev literally risked his life to reveal the true attitude and consequences of Russian liberation of the eastern Ukrainian cities. The entire speech can be summarized as following. The war never helped Donbass region, so do not trust Putin, whatever he tells you, he is lying. So guys, today, let's explore who's behind the shifting narratives, how ordinary people became pawns in the propaganda war, and why certain events from just a few years ago already feel like they belong to some distant past. In a world where truth changes shape depending on which T or Telegram channel you follow, it is very important to remember that not so long ago, life across the Russian-Ukrainian border was surprisingly normal. Igor Srelkov, also known as Igor Girkin, used to be a name that popped up everywhere back in the early days of the Donbass conflict. He rose to popularity after the events of 2014 as one of the main masterminds behind the annexation of Crimea and the creator of People's Militia in Donetsk region. So, as you can imagine, he was one of Putin's favorite people all the time. And then he faded from public's view and, well, we all know what happened next. After Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, he began to resurface in the information space, reminding everyone that he still existed, even from behind the cell doors. Convicted to extremism, he famously criticized the Kremlin's military leadership, throwing around phrases like Kremlin gnomes and plywood marshals, calling the current special military operation a complete and outright failure. Of course, he's not the only disgruntled voice in the mix. Alexander Borodai, once the Prime Minister of the self-proclaimed Donetsk People's Republic, DPR, and now a United Russia deputy, has also been airing his frustrations. In one leaked recording, Borodai allegedly admitted that there are huge losses on the front, with plenty of people simply dying in the name of Russia and Putin. One thing worth mentioning about this particular person, by the way, is that he called those men doing the ultimate sacrifice for the delusions of Putin as spareable men, like they are nothing but extras in the grand plot. It was never about their survival anyway, so why should anyone care? And then there is Pavel Gubarev. Remember him? He was also once the so-called People's Governor of the Donetsk People's Republic. I now wonder what's up with this job being the head of the DPR, that every single person who took it in the past made a radical 180 turn against their feeding hands. They must have been exposed to something for their Kremlin guidebooks and manuals never prepared them for. Because 3 heads of this region going crazy in such a short period of time is definitely not a coincidence. So yeah, back to Pavel Gubarev. He made it big on social media with radical statements, stoking tensions at a time when cooler heads might have prevented a lot of bloodshed. By 2023, he became a leading figure in this so-called club of angry patriots, though some folks might call it more accurately a club of disappointed ones. Gubarev has repeatedly expressed that the war brought nothing but death and heartbreak to Donetsk, and that Russia too is suffering monstrous human losses. Fast forward to 2025, and Gubarev continues to stun observers with his revelations. He recently told an interviewer that his own mother lived for years in a Ukrainian-controlled city, apparently quite peacefully, until liberation forces arrived and turned her life into a basement-bound nightmare. It was not even a leaked conversation like the one happened with Alexander Borodai, no. This was intentionally said by Pavel Gubarev, being fully aware of which words he chooses. This is not even a borderline discreditation of the Russian military. This is a criminal offense and treachery, according to the most recent Russian laws. And since he holds a very high position and he's a pretty public figure within the regime of Putin, the punishment he might face is far more dangerous than just decades in jail. Being fully aware that he risks his life saying those things, he still did it. The main question is, why? Before 2022, both Russian and Ukrainian officials maintained a kind of uneasy status quo. Sure, since 2014, when Crimea was annexed, tensions ran high, and there were bloody skirmishes in Donbass. But for the average person living in border cities like Belgrade in Russia or Kharkov in Ukraine, daily life did not immediately stop. People still cross the border for business or to visit family, or just to simply go to do shopping. You were even able to cross the border using your internal passport. No visas were ever required. Some folks from Belgrade took a bus to Kharkov because it was closer than Moscow, treating it almost like the next major neighboring city. In 2021, during the DC's times, it was not strange for someone to post online a question. Hey guys, how do I best get from Moscow to Kiev? Will a negative test be enough? And these people, they would get answers about schedules, routes, and how to handle the latest travel restrictions. The answers came from both Russians and Ukrainians. The conversations were in full and fluent Russian, nobody cared. Nobody seemed worried about being arrested, shot, or labeled a foreign spy just because they spoke Russian in Ukraine or had a Russian passport. This era feels almost surreal in hindsight right now. Multiple bus lines ran daily between Belgrade's central station and Kharkov city center. People joked that the biggest obstacle was not an angry border official accusing you of conspiracy, but having the right test in a printed form or a QR code. Even Pavel Gubarev recently admitted that in 2021 he managed to get crucial medicine for his son from Kharkov, all thanks to a Ukrainian acquaintance who simply shipped it by taxi to Belgrade. In today's hypercharged climate, that story seems like it belongs to a parallel universe. Life in these two countries and even in neighboring regions and cities was completely normal. There was no bad attitude towards Russian speakers. They were not hunted down or sacrificed in the name of Ukrainian Lord the Savior Stepan Bandera. Not a single thing that Putin and his propagandistic minions are spreading right now was happening in the past. So the biggest accomplishment, if you can call it this way, of the Russian propaganda was to literally replace the reality which happened not that long time ago with a completely new reality which never happened. Something constructed purely out of minds of the Kremlin's officials. And then they made the people of Russia believe it and accept it as the one and only truth. Everything turned upside down after February 24th, 2022. Russian missiles started slamming into Ukrainian cities, with Kharkov's Saltivka district particularly devastated. Once a prospering residential zone, it was ravaged by airstrikes for months, leaving many buildings in ruins. Today, if you stand in northern Saltivka, you'll see entire blocks reduced to skeletons of concrete and twisted metal. That's the reality of liberation and denazification, as the Kremlin ironically branded its campaign. Community centers obliterated, entire neighborhoods leveled, thousands of lives torn apart. Meanwhile, Russians in Belgrade began to face shelling too, as the war spilled back across the border. Kremlin mouthpieces used this to justify the invasion post factum, saying, "Look, Ukraine is attacking Russian territory. This proves we were right all along. I knew we were right." But it was an invented logic loop, like setting a house on fire and then claiming you always knew it was a fire hazard. Like really, what they thought was going to happen? To attack its neighboring country and expect absolutely no resistance? This is total absurdity. Only inside Putin's imaginary world something like this can happen. Official channels simultaneously promoted the idea that the Ukrainian government had been massacring Russian speakers for 8 years. Lavrov, Rogozin, and other high-profile figures fed the public a narrative of ethnic genocide. A horrifying storyline that made little sense to anyone who remembered crossing the border in 2021 without so much as a sideways glance from a Ukrainian border guard. Those politicians who were very respected people in the past became nothing but ridiculous clowns in the eyes of Russian people, whether they want to acknowledge it or not. Because it was their responsibility to promote the craziest of the craziest ideas, diverting attention from Putin, because Putin can never look stupid in the eyes of his citizens. Now, 3 years later, after that invasion, some of the original infiltrators from 2014, like these Strelkovs and Gubarevs, found themselves in very strange positions. Strelkov sits behind bars, Gubarev complains that Russian officials ignore Donetsk's real needs and now see no way out of the quagmire they created. Even prominent hardliners like Evgeny Prigozhin have admitted how wildly off track the operation went, confessing that the Kremlin expected an easy walkover, but ended up with a brutal war of attrition. Prigozhin was probably the most vocal of them all and was ready to follow through on his words and promises. And well, we all know what happened next. The almost successful mutiny that lasted less than 24 hours and made the entire country, not just Russia also, hold their breath in anticipation, and then the ultimate plane flight which never reached its final destination. Tragic, but expected Russian-style ending for those who dare to go against Putin but are not willing to push until victorious end. So the question is, how do you rewrite history if some of your most radical supporters are telling stories that contradict the official script? Gubarev's personal story about Kharkov, where a Ukrainian classmate readily helped save his son's health, directly clashes with the propaganda that claims Ukraine was never safe for Russian speakers, that stepping your foot across the border was a zero chance of survival mission. It's these small human stories that expose the wider manipulations. The idea that war was inevitable is nonsense. Yes, tensions ran high since 2014, but by 2021, the intensity of the fighting has reduced significantly. Border crossings, while more complicated than before, were still happening. Trade continued. People visited one another without fear of immediate arrest or harm. That might not sound like a fairy tale, but it was still a resemblance of normalcy compared to what came after. And no matter how state controls media tries to twist it, a single man's snap's decision to send troops in changed everything. Well, there you have it, guys. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to my channel for more videos like this. If you wish to support my work, there are PayPal donations, the link is down below. Thanks so much for watching, see you tomorrow.
To sway. We do not believe in ridiculous Russian propaganda.